I am Nancy Kay of the League of Women Voters of Humboldt County. Other League members with me today are Judy Bennett, Kay Escarda, Bird Lochte, Amy Moffett, and Maggie Augustine. In 1911, California became the 10th state to adopt the initiative process. Since then, it has been a constant part of California policymaking. It has been disparaged by some and applauded by others. No other state, apart from Oregon, has used the initiative process as much as California has. 26 states and the District of Columbia have some variation of the initiative process. Before a petition is circulated, the California District Attorney's Office has approved the proposition's legality. Even so, we know a past proposition can still face challenges in the high courts, and sometimes they have been overturned by the high courts. So what is a proposition? Well, there's two ways that the voters get to decide changes in California. Voters decide on changes to the California law, and that's again by petition. It's an initiative statute. The citizens initiate the proposition. In a referendum, the legislature prepares the statute changes, but they go on to the voters to get signatures on a petition. The referenda on a ballot are not as common as an initiative measure. Voters can also decide on changes to the Constitution. This requires more signatures on the petition than to change a statute. An initiative constitutional amendment, where citizens initiate the amendment, and there's the legislative constitutional amendment, where the legislature initiates it, and we, again, get signatures on a petition before it becomes a proposition on the ballot. What kinds of propositions do we have this year? We have 6 initiative statutes. Those, again, come from the people. We have 1 referendum, which comes from the state legislature. We have 1 constitutional amendment, which is coming from the people. And we have 4 legislative amendments, again, generated by the legislature. So before we go any further, we would like to take a minute to talk to you about voting by mail. As you know, Governor Newsom has decreed that every voter in California will get a vote by mail ballot. Vote by mail is safe, and there are easy ways to do it. After completing your ballot, you can seal it in the envelope provided. Make sure you sign it on the envelope provided, because an unsigned ballot doesn't work. Return it by mail, and you can also return it in person. And you can track it if you desire at the website or at the bottom of the page here. If you bring it in person, you can start returning it as early as October 5th. October 5th is when the secure drop boxes will be available. Of course, you can always return it as early as October 5th to the county elections office. From October 31st through Election Day, you can go to the voting assistance centers that are located around the county. And on Election Day, there's going to be even more voting assistance centers. So let's look at where the drop boxes are located. As you can see, they're distributed among the county, so the people that prefer to drop their ballots off in a drop box rather in the mail have easy access to them. This is a list of where the voter assistance centers will be. Again, these will open up on October 31st. They will run through and include Election Day. And finally, we have on Election Day some additional voting assistance centers. Now let's talk about the propositions. Our first proposition will be presented by Bird Lochte.
Proposition 14 is an initiative statute, a law proposed by the people through the initiative process. It is called the California Stem Cell Research, Treatments, and Cures Initiative of 2020. Proposition 14 seeks to authorize state bonds of $5.5 billion to continue funding stem cell and other medical research. This money would build on the work from Prop 17 passed in 2004 that gave researchers the right to conduct stem cell research and other medical research, including training, research facility construction, and administrative costs. $1.5 billion would be dedicated to brain-related diseases, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, epilepsy, and other brain and mental nervous system diseases and conditions. It appropriates general fund money for repayment. In 2004, voters approved Proposition 71, which gave California researchers the right to conduct stem cell research. It also established the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, CIRM, primarily to provide grants to universities and other entities to support stem cell research. It allocated $3 billion in general obligation bonds for this purpose. Grants have funded basic research, developed potential treatments, and undertaken clinical trials. The University of California system has received the greatest number of grants, with some also going to private institutions such as Stanford University. Additional funding has come from industry, private donations, and federal funds. Prop 71 provided that any inventions from these grants would share a portion of any income with the state. Since 2017, monies have been spent. Since 2017, the state has received about $350,000 from inventions. Now most of the Proposition 71 monies have been spent. More grants will be needed to maintain employment for those involved in the research, to continue projects already in progress, and to advance new research. The estimated fiscal impact is repayment of about $260 million per year for about 20 years, but there are no state repayments for 5 years, so there will be no impact during the immediate recovery from the economic situation of today. The cost per person when payments start in 2026 is estimated to be less than $5 annually. Indirect effects are uncertain, depending on new treatments or inventions which may result from the research and which will contribute some income to the state. A yes vote will allow for $5.5 billion in bonds to fund more grants for research. A no vote will not allow $5.5 billion in bonds to fund more research. Proponents of Proposition 14 say, Proposition 71, which runs out this year, has already provided 9,200 FDA-approved clinical trials for chronic diseases and conditions, as well as 2,900 medical discoveries that have benefited patients. Proposition 14 will build on the success of Prop 71, accelerating medical breakthroughs out of the lab and into clinical trials to help patients. Collaboration with the National Institute of Health has been very beneficial. Proposition 14 will contribute to economic recovery by providing new revenue and generating jobs, making treatments more affordable and more available to patients. There are no state repayments for 5 years, so there will be no impact during the immediate recovery from the economic situation, and the cost per person when payments start in 2026 is estimated to be less than $5 annually. Supporters include the University of California, several Nobel Prize winners, American Association for Cancer Research, Diabetes Group, ALS, Golden West Chapter, Alzheimer's from Los Angeles, and at least 70 other patient advocate groups. Opponents say California cannot afford $5.5 billion in new bonds, which becomes $7.8 billion with the interest over the life of the bond repayment. They question the integrity and independence of the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, calling it a state bureaucracy that was created to oversee the grants from Prop 71. Proposition 14 does not address the flaws from Proposition 71, which did not bring money to the state as promised and did not provide any approved therapies. Proposition 14 will mean higher taxes and layoffs of thousands of nurses and other medical personnel. Grants went to private entities in other states. Institutions such as the National Institute of Health can do a better job. Groups with arguments against Proposition 14 are the Institute of Medicine, the Little Hoover Commission, and the Center for Society and Genetics in Berkeley. The California Association of Realtors has supported Proposition 14 with $15 million. No large donations have been recorded against Proposition 14. Now here is Amy Moffett with Proposition 15.
Thank you, Bird. Prop 15 is an initiative constitutional amendment that was put on the ballot by petition signatures. It reads, increases funding sources for public schools, community colleges, and local government services by changing tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. The fiscal impact of this is increased property taxes on commercial properties worth more than $3 million, providing $6.5 billion to $11.5 billion in new funding to local governments and schools. California cities, counties, schools, and special districts collect property taxes from property owners based on the value of their property. Around $65 billion each year is raised for local governments based on property taxes. Depending on the county, about 60% of property taxes go to cities, counties, and special districts, while the other 40% goes to schools and community colleges. Property applies to many different kinds of property, including land, building, equipment, machinery, computer, furniture, and other business equipment. Unlike land and buildings, business equipment is taxed based on how much it could be sold for today. Currently, the property tax bill is calculated by the taxable value of their property multiplied by their property tax rate. Land and buildings have their taxable value set at the purchase price, and then each year after the purchase, it is adjusted for inflation by up to 2%. When a property is sold again, its taxable value is reset to its new purchase price. The taxable value of most land and buildings is less than what they could be sold for because the price of most properties could be sold for grows faster than 2% per year. This measure would require commercial and industrial land and buildings to be taxed based on how much they could be sold for instead of their original purchase price. This change would be put in place in 2022 and would not start before 2025 for properties used by California businesses that meet certain rules and have 50 or fewer employees. Housing and agricultural land would not change and would continue to be taxed on its original purchase price. Owners with $3 million or less worth of commercial land and buildings would not be affected and continue to be taxed based on their original purchase price. This measure also includes a change in tax on business equipment less than $500,000, which would be no taxes on those items, as well as businesses that meet certain rules and have 50 or fewer employees. They will also not pay taxes on business equipment. Supporters argue that this Proposition 15 closes property tax loopholes benefiting wealthy corporations. The top 10% of California's most valuable non-residential commercial properties account for 92% of this measure's new revenues. It cuts taxes for small businesses. It protects homeowners and renters. It protects agricultural land. It requires full transparency by requiring schools and local government to publicly disclose all new revenues they receive and how they are spent. Prop 15 funds can go directly to education, and state politicians can't take it away. This is supported by nurses, teachers, small business owners, affordable housing advocates, and community organizations. Opponents say that Prop 15 is a $12.5 billion property tax increase that raises our cost of living. Prop 15 repeals taxpayer protections in Prop 13, which capped property taxes and limited increases annually, providing certainty in your bill. It doesn't serve our current budget crisis as most new revenues won't arrive until 2025. It doesn't stop the tax from being passed on to small business tenants with skyrocketing rents. The California Assessors Association say this measure will cost more than $1 billion to implement. Opponents are mainly from the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And now I'd like to introduce Prop 16 with Kay Escarda.
Thank you, Amy. Proposition 16, Assembly Constitutional Amendment, and it's entitled Governance Preference. It allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. Affirmative action in state hiring, contracting, and education was banned in California by Proposition 209. Proposition 16 this year will reverse that ban and allow schools and other institutions to take race, ethnicity, color, national origin, and gender into consideration when admitting students to colleges, hiring employees for public jobs, and selecting contractors for public projects. The history behind this proposition is that for some 20 years, policies and programs were developed to allow and to encourage women and ethnic minorities to participate fully in public education, government, and contracts. These programs were commonly referred to as affirmative action. In 1996, an amendment to the Constitution, Proposition 209, championed by Ward Connolly, banned consideration of sex, race, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, education, and contracting in California unless qualified for certain exceptions. Since that time, according to Assembly Member Shirley Weber, the sponsor of this current amendment, the percentage of participating people and most minorities under the ban has decreased. Both federal and California constitutions require equal protection, which generally means that people in similar situations are treated similarly under the law. Proposition 16 seeks to reverse that ban imposed by 209 and allow for policies and programs intended to prevent discrimination that are consistent with state and federal law. The legislative analyst states there is no direct fiscal effects since the measure does not require any change to policy and programs. However, there could be effects depending on the future policy and program choices made by state and local entities. Those results are highly uncertain. So the question is, do the voters want to reverse the ban imposed by Proposition 209 on affirmative action programs in public education, employment, and contracting? A yes vote would repeal Proposition 209. This means state and local entities could consider affirmative action programs again in public education, employment, and contracting to the extent allowed by state and federal law. A no vote means the current ban on these considerations would remain in the Constitution. Those in favor of Proposition 16 say that repealing 209 allows public institutions to work toward greater diversity. It expands local opportunity to all Californians, increasing access to fair wages, good jobs, and quality schools for everyone. It fights wage discrimination and systemic racism, opening up opportunities for women and people of color. Those opposed to Proposition 16 say that politicians want to strip our Constitution of its prohibition on discrimination and preferential treatment, so-called affirmative action. Reversing 209 gives an unfair advantage to minorities. Discrimination is bad, whether it benefits underprivileged groups or not. The state should treat all Californians equally. Proposition 16 is supported by Yes on 16, called Opportunity for All, a broad coalition of government officials, educators, minority businesses, and organizations, including the League of Women Voters. Financial support totals $9,652,000 and change, with $3.2 million from the Opportunity for All Coalition, a PAC. Editorial support comes from the San Francisco Chronicle, Mercury News, Los Angeles Times. Proposition 16 opposed by the no on 16, 2 Republican state senators, U.S. Representative Darrell Issa, the original 209 sponsor, Ward Connerly, and an Asian American organization, another PAC. Financial opposition totals $122,678, with $50,000 of that coming from Students for Fair Admission. Editorial opposition comes from the Wall Street Journal and the Orange County Register. And now I'll be happy to introduce Judy Bennett to address Proposition 22.
Thank you, Kay. Proposition 17 restores right to vote after completion of prison term. This proposition was placed on the ballot by the state legislature. The question is, should voting rights be restored to persons on parole who have completed their prison terms? Currently, the California Constitution requires the legislature to provide for the disqualification of electors while mentally incompetent or imprisoned or on parole for the conviction of a felony. Existing statutory law defines imprisoned as currently serving a state or federal prison sentence. In 1974, California voters approved restoring the right to vote to persons once they had completed their sentences. Proposition 17 would restore voting rights to persons on parole. Because current state law allows registered voters to run for elective offices, this measure would result in people on state parole being able to do so as well, if they meet existing qualifications, such as not having been convicted of perjury or bribery. Your ballot reads, restores right to vote after completion of prison term, legislative constitutional amendment. There would be increased fiscal effects there would be increased ongoing county costs as far as fiscal effects. Proposition 17 would increase the number of persons who can register and vote in elections, and annual county costs for these increased numbers would likely be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars statewide. Proposition 17 would create a one-time workload for the state to update voter registration cards and systems. This one-time cost is likely in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but this is less than 1% of the state's current general fund balance. So again, a yes vote means you want people on parole to be able to have their right to vote restored, and a no vote means you want the Constitution to remain the same. People on parole cannot vote. Supporters of proposition say nearly 50,000 Californians are working, paying taxes, and positively contributing to their communities, yet are being denied their right to vote. Civic engagement is collected to lower rates of recidivism. 19 other states allow persons on parole to vote, and California should be among them. A Florida study found that persons who had completed their prison sentences and had their right to vote restored, were less likely to commit crimes in the future. Proposition 17 will have real-life impact. Supporters include the California Legislature, the League of Women Voters of California, Californians for Safety and Justice, and Kevin McCarthy, Assembly member and author of Proposition 17. Opponents of Proposition 17 say parole in California is for serious and violent criminals. Parole is to prove rehabilitation before full liberty, including voting rights are restored. Parole is an adjustment period when violent felons prove their desire to adjust to behaving properly in a free society. Most parolees stumble, and 50% are convicted of new crimes. Justice demands a no vote on Prop 17. Opponents include Victims United of California, Jim Nielsen, retired chairman of the California Board of Prison Terms, and the Election Integrity Project, California. Now I'd like to introduce Amy Moffett, who'll tell you about Proposition 18.
Thank you, Judy. Prop 18 is a legislative constitutional amendment put on the ballot by the legislature. It reads, amends California Constitution to permit 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election and be otherwise eligible to vote. As of June 2020, there are about 108,000 17-year-olds pre-registered to vote in California. A person generally can pre-register to vote in California if they are a U.S. citizen and is either 16 or 17 years old. State law prohibits some people from voting, including those who are in prison or on parole. So what this proposition would change if it were to pass is that eligible 17-year-olds who will be 18-year-old by the time of the next general election may vote in the primary election and any special elections preceding the general election. Because current state law allows registered voters to run for elective office, this measure would result in 17-year-olds who turn 18 by the next general election to do so as well if they meet all other existing eligibility requirements for elective office. Supporters say that Prop 18 will allow first-time voters to participate in a full election cycle, provided that they are 18 by the time of the general election. They also say that this will boost youth civic engagement in our elections and help create more lifelong participants in the most fundamental process of democracy. California is behind the curve when it comes to this issue. 18 states in the U.S. already allow 17-year-olds to participate in primaries and caucuses. Youth are extremely underrepresented in our electoral process, despite the fact that they are heavily impacted by the policies created by those elected. Studies show that voting is habit forming. Once an individual votes in an election, they are more likely to do so again. Opponents say that the law prohibits younger teens from smoking, drinking, and even tanning because research shows the logic and reasoning area of their brains is not fully developed. Those abilities are vital to responsible voting. Real life experience with earning a living and paying taxes is vital for voting. They have no frame of reference to make the vital decisions voters make for themselves and all of members of society when they vote. 17-year-olds are minors for several reasons. They are a captive audience to teachers, making them vulnerable to one-sided influence. Important decisions must be made by voters who are legally adults, not by high school minors. So in summary, a yes vote means that the state constitution will be amended to permit 17-year-olds who will be at least 18 years old and otherwise eligible to vote at the time of the next general election to vote in any primary or special election that occurs before the next general election. A no vote means that nothing will change and only voters age 18 and older and otherwise eligible can vote during any election. And now I'd like to introduce Bird Lochte to talk about Prop 19.
Thank you, Amy. Proposition 19 is a legislative constitutional amendment, which would be added as sections 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 to Article 8A in the Constitution. The ballot title is Changes Certain Property Tax Rules, but it is referred to as the Home Protection for Seniors, Severely Disabled, Families, and Victims of Wildfires or Natural Disasters Act. Proposition 19 allows eligible homeowners defined as seniors, severely disabled, families, and victims of wildfires or natural disasters to transfer tax assessments with an adjustment for a more expensive new primary resident anywhere in the state. The new resident must be purchased or constructed within 2 years of the sale. Prop 19 will reassess at market value inherited homes not used as primary residences by the new owners, closing a loophole that can benefit wealthy heirs who use the inherited property for income purposes, not as a primary residence. It will establish the California Fire Response Fund for fire suppression staffing for the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. It will allocate new revenue or net savings to wildfire agencies and counties. In the 2019-2020 session of the legislature, the California Assembly and Senate each voted by a 2/3 majority to place Proposition 19 on the ballot for the voters to approve. The California Association of Realtors had negotiated an agreement to withdraw their own ballot measure if the legislature did this. Currently, property taxes increase when there is a change in ownership. Currently, eligible homeowners can transfer their tax assessment to a different home of equal or lesser value without paying higher taxes. Proposition would allow a transfer to a more expensive primary residence anywhere in the state. Currently, this can happen only once. Proposition 19 would allow such a transfer 3 times. Currently, transfers or inheritances from parent to child or grandparent to grandchild are exempt from increased taxes. Proposition 19 would eliminate this exemption in all cases except when the property is used by the heir as a principal residence or for farming. The legislative analyst suggests that local governments and schools could gain millions of dollars of property tax increase, which could grow to hundreds of millions of dollars over time. It also acknowledges that local governments may have additional costs to implement the changes. A yes vote will allow this measure to be added to the Constitution, and new rules will apply for transfer and sales of property for the defined eligible homeowners. A no vote will not allow this measure to be added to the Constitution, keeping the current rules in the tax code for eligible groups. Proponents of Proposition 19 say it limits property taxes for eligible homeowners and removes restrictions on the location of a new primary residence of eligible homeowners, especially if they need to move closer to family or medical care, find a home that better fits their current needs, or replace a home and limit damage from wildfires. It would eliminate the fear of increased taxes when an eligible homeowner's home no longer fits their needs. It would close the loophole exploited by out-of-town investors and heirs who do not live in the home but use it for some income purposes without paying fair share taxes. Proponents cite cases of politicians who have taken advantage of this loophole for inherited properties. Prop 19 provides funding dedicated to fire protection and medical response. It enjoys bipartisan support, and proponents emphasize that Prop 19 protects the rights of homeowners under Prop 13. Supporters of Proposition 19 are diverse groups, including firefighters, emergency responders, seniors' disability rights groups, various chambers of commerce, local Democrats and Republicans, wildfire victims, and family farmers. Opponents of Prop 19 say that it is an attempt by Sacramento politicians and real estate special interests to raise property taxes by removing voter-approved protection in the Constitution, 1986 Prop 58 and 1996 Prop 193. It would force the reassessment of inherited property unless it is used as the new owner's principal residence within 1 year, eliminating the earlier Proposition 58. Proposition 19 would force the sale of a family business because of increased taxes. The Legislative Analyst's Office projects that it could eventually cost California families about $2 billion annually in increased property taxes. The same provisions of Proposition 19 were rejected in Prop 5 in 2018 by the voters who decided that the current provisions were fair. Opponents say it is shocking that the backers of Prop 19 expect it to trigger the sale of more homes. They say Proposition 19 is not necessary and that it is a major hit on the ability of any parent in California to take care of their kids. Listing arguments against Proposition 19 are the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers League and some Republicans and Democrats in the legislature. Major backers of Proposition 19 are the California Association of Realtors and their PAC, National Association of Realtors, and California Coalition of Firefighters, with over $15.7 million. No large donations have been recorded against Proposition 19. Now you'll hear from Maggie Augustine on Proposition 20.
Thank you, Bird. Proposition 20 is an initiative statute put on the ballot by petition signatories. The alternative title is Criminal Sentencing, Parole, and DNA Initiative. In terms of criminal sentencing, a felony is the most severe type of crime. Violent serious ones, murder, robbery, rape. Non-violent ones, human trafficking, and selling drugs. People with prior records are sentenced to the state prison system. People without prior records are sentenced to county jail or community supervision. A misdemeanor is a less severe crime, such as shoplifting, assault, theft less than $950. People are sentenced to county jail or community supervision, a fine, or a combination of the three. A wobbler is a case between a felony and misdemeanor, such as theft less than $950 is misdemeanor, above is a felony. Proposition 20 would reclassify some misdemeanors as wobblers. Theft, $250 to $950. It creates two new theft-related crimes. Serial theft. Any person with two or more past theft-related crimes who is guilty of shoplifting or petty theft with property value greater than $250 would be charged with serial theft. Organized retail theft. Any person acting with others who commits petty theft or shoplifting two or more times with total value of property stolen within 180 days exceeds $250 would be charged with organized theft. In terms of community supervision, people released from state and county prisons are supervised for a certain length of time and under certain rules. If the rules of supervision are broken currently, state agents and county officers have an option to ask a judge to change the terms of supervision. Proposition 20, if a person has violated the terms of supervision 3 times, the agents and officers must ask for a change in the terms of supervision. Also, state parole and county probation departments must exchange more information about the individuals they supervise. For consideration of release, inmates convicted of nonviolent felonies are eligible to be considered for release after serving the term for their primary crime, which is the crime with the longest sentence. Currently, an inmate can request a review of the decision, and if denied release, is reconsidered the following year. Proposition 20 exclude those convicted of assault and domestic violence from this process. It denies release to inmates who pose unreasonable risk of committing felonies that result in victims. Inmates denied release must wait 2 years for reconsideration. Allow prosecutors to require another review of release decisions. Victims must be notified of the review and may participate. It requires the Board of Parole hearings to consider more issues when deciding release or no release. Currently, for DNA collection, it applies to felonies, sex offenders, and arsonists. Proposition 20 requires state and local law enforcement to collect DNA from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors, shoplifting, forging checks, domestic violent crimes. The physical effect is difficult to estimate but would depend on how it is implemented. However, it could increase costs for tens of millions of dollars annually. In terms of supporters, there are numerous individuals who support this proposition: public officials, public safety leaders, community and business leaders, and citizens. The aggregate support contribution is over $3 million. In terms of opponents, the entities are far fewer and include such individuals as the League of Women Voters of California, Californians for Safety and Justice, the California Teachers Association, and the aggregate opposed contributions are over $5 million. Those who support it feels it closes a loophole in the law that allows convicted child molesters, sexual predators, and others convicted of violent crimes to be released early. It expands DNA collections to solve more serious crimes. It strengthens sanctions against habitual thieves. Those who are against it say it is a prison spending scam. California already has severe and lengthy sentences for serious crimes. It would divert money from rehabilitation, schools, mental health, and homelessness. Now, Kay Escarda will discuss Proposition 21.
Thank you, Maggie. Proposition 21, an initiative statute. It reads, expands local government's control to enact rent control on residential property. What the ballot measure says is that this proposal would make some changes to the 1995 Costa-Hawkins Housing Act, allowing local governments to apply rent control on more properties, along with other changes, including the rental increase cap to 15% over 3 years. This does not include single-family homes of 2 or fewer properties. It also limits how much a landlord can increase rents when a new renter moves in. They must allow an increase of up to 15% during the first 3 years. It also requires that rent control laws allow landlords a fair return on their investment. It will put recent court rulings into state law. The history behind this proposition is that rental housing is expensive in California. Renters typically pay 50% more for housing than in other states. Some rents are more than double the national average because of a continual shortage of housing units. Competition for units increases rent. Not all cities have rent control laws, but those that do, such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Jose, limit how much a landlord can increase rents each year. Local control boards are paid by fees from the landlords. Currently, the Costa-Hawkins Act has 3 limitations. It cannot apply to single-family homes. It cannot apply to housing built after 1995, and it cannot tell landlords the rental amount of a new unit. Additionally, a new law limits yearly increase by not more than 5% plus inflation or 10%, whichever is lower. This law is in effect until 2030. Well, this proposal allows rent control on more properties. Cities and counties can apply controls to most housing more than 15 years old, but not single-family homes, a second home, or duplexes. They can limit how much a landlord can increase rents when a new renter moves in, but they must allow increases up to 15% over the next 3 years. And it also codifies that new state law allowing landlords a fair rate of return. Looking at the fiscal effects now, they say that state and local governments get their revenue from personal, property, and retail sales taxes. These all may be impacted. The state collects personal taxes on income, including rents received. Local government collect property and retail sales taxes. If localities expand controls, it could have several effects according to the legislative analyst. The revenue could go down if landlords sell to private owners. Rental property values could go down if potential landlords would not pay as much for properties. Some landlords would receive less rental income. However, some renters would pay less for rent and could spend more then on retail goods. Fewer renters may not want to move because their rent could increase. So, depending on local government choices, the measure would likely reduce state and local revenue over time in the range of from very little to millions of dollars per year, according to the LAO. In other words, it's up in the air, depending on how it's implemented. Arguments for are that renters need protection in California's expensive rental market. It builds in protection for new housing and owners of only 2 properties, and it guards against increased homelessness. The measure is supported by Renters and Homeowners United, APAC, and the AIDS Health Care Foundation, the Democratic Party, and some unions. Financial support totals over $28 million, and the largest single one is over $16 million from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Editorial support comes from the Los Angeles Times. Arguments against are that the most controls worsen the housing crisis. It reduces private builder incentive to build housing, and it reduces property owner values, therefore local tax revenue. The measure is opposed by 4 different coalitions of apartment owners and some housing, veteran, senior, and social justice advocates. Financial support totals over $25 million, with the largest single one coming from the California's for Responsible Housing, as sponsored by the California Apartment Association, and that is over $15 million. Editorial opposition comes from Orange County Register, the Bakersfield Californian, Mercury News, and the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm going to turn it over now to Nancy Kay for Proposition 22.
Okay, thank you, Kay. Proposition 22. Proposition exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. The question is, should app-based drivers be reclassified as independent contractors and receive certain benefits? Or do they stay as employees and receive standard employee benefits? App-based rides and delivery companies are largely headquartered in California. In total, they're worth more than Ford, General Motors, and Fiat Chrysler combined. In 2018, a landmark California Supreme case ruled that most workers should be classified as employees unless companies could prove otherwise. Following that, in 2019, the California legislature passed AB 5, a law that expanded on the Supreme Court ruling, mandating minimum wage, sick leave, and basic employer paid benefits. Well, since AB 5 passed, the state says that the drivers for app-based companies must be employees. Now, the rideshare and delivery companies do not agree with that new state law that it should make their drivers employees, and they continue to hire their drivers as independent contractors. Well, the state attorney general recently filed suit to sue the companies to force them to hire drivers as employees. and this case is pending. This proposition would exempt rideshare and delivery drivers from the current state law that requires them to be classified as employees. It would allow them to be classified as independent contractors. This is the question that is before the court in the suit filed by the Attorney General. This proposition comes into play if the Attorney General wins the case and the court finds that the drivers must be classified as employees. The proposition also enhances the compensation of independent contracted drivers, including a minimum of 120% of the local minimum wage. This would be paid for time spent driving, but not for when the drivers are waiting. It would require companies to provide health insurance stipends for drivers who work more than 15 hours a week. It would require the companies to pay costs when the driver gets hurt on the job and to replace some of the resulting lost income. It would prohibit drivers from working more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period. It would require companies to develop harassment policies, conduct criminal background checks, and mandate safety training for drivers. While employees, drivers would get at least minimum wage, plus overtime pay, and pay for waiting time. They would have paid breaks and sick leave. They would receive standard employer paid job benefits that independent contractors do not, including the employer paid contributions to Social Security and Medicare. And also, unemployment and workers' compensation insurances would be paid as employees. But as employees, they would work shifts, and they would work mandatory hours. As independent contractors, the drivers would have flexibility to set their own hours for when, where, and how much they work. The drivers would pay their own vehicle expenses. The company and the drivers share the fares. But drivers spend about 1/3 of their time waiting and make between $15 and $16 an hour after accounting for that waiting time and driver expenses. So if this proposition passes, the app-based drivers would be allowed to be classified as independent contractors, and they would have some benefits. Your ballot reads again, exempts age-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. The Secretary of State's legislative analyst says that the fiscal effect would be on state income tax minor, but there would be a fiscal effect. If passed and drivers remain independent contractors, the companies would not incur more costs. The fees for rides and deliveries would not be increased to cover those costs. And the demands for rides and deliveries would not decrease due to the increased fees. This would affect the company's profits and the value of their stock. The lower fees and resulting higher demand would allow drivers as a group to earn more money. So to vote yes means that you would like the transportation and delivery drivers to be exempt from the current state law that classifies them as employees and would like them to be able to be independent contractors. A vote no means that the app-based ride, share, and delivery companies would have to hire drivers as employees. The supporters say that Prop 22 would improve delivery and rideshare by requiring companies to provide new benefits and expand public safety protections. It says, the supporters say it mirrors the current law under AB 5 in many ways. The supporters also say by a 4-to-1 margin, drivers prefer to work as independent contractors. These are parents who want flexible schedules, students who want to earn money between classes, retirees who supplement fixed incomes, military spouses who frequently relocate, and families who are struggling with California's high cost of living. So supporters also say it keeps the app-based transportation and delivery services safe, affordable, and accessible, and saves jobs while millions are struggling. 80% of the drivers work less than 20 hours per week and have time for their other obligations. The supporters of this proposition are the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Jose Mercury News, and the East Bay Times. Small Business Association supports it. The NAACP supports it. The California Senior Advocates League supports it. And the Independent Drivers Alliance of California support it. But the financial support is a lot more interesting in that more contributions to pass this proposition have been made for this proposition than any other on the ballot. Contributions total about 183 million. That's twice as many contributions than the second highest contributions to the ballot this year. And 80% of the 183 million come from Lyft, Uber, and DoorDash. Now, let's hear what the opponents say. The opponents say Prop 22 would replace the basic employee protections with lower benefits to save companies costs. Uber and Lyft are already required to do background checks anyway. And the current law does not limit driver flexibility. The majority of Uber and Lyft drivers work 30 or more hours per week. Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and DoorDash wrote Proposition 22 and are spending millions on it to increase their profits. They lost in court, and they're trying to buy their way to deregulation. Prop 22 is all about money. It's not about helping drivers. And the opponents say billion-dollar companies shouldn't get to pick and choose the laws they follow or to write their own. Now, who are these opponents? Well, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Service Employees International, Black Women for Wellness, and the California Labor Federation, and many other labor unions. The financial support, it's just $7 million has been spent from various small groups. And now I'm going to move on to Proposition 23. Proposition 23 is about kidney dialysis clinics. It's an initiative statute. It asks three basic questions. Should kidney dialysis clinics be required to have a licensed physician on site during all treatment hours? Should the California Department of Public Health's responsibilities increase to oversee clinics reporting of dialysis-related infections? And should clinics be prohibited from refusing care to patients based on source of payment? The issues around kidney dialysis machines are back on the ballot again. In November of 2018, Prop 8, relating again to kidney dialysis clinics, was on the ballot. It was a complex measure and not easy for most voters to understand. It was questionable whether this was an appropriate issue to ask the voters to make a decision on, much less an informed decision. But then Prop 8 failed in November 2018. The current Prop 23 is a simplified version of the earlier one. There is disagreement about whether the presence of a doctor is always necessary or could exacerbate a doctor shortage, and over whether the costs are manageable or prohibitively high. In California, at least 70,000 people undergo dialysis treatment for end-stage renal disease and must receive dialysis to survive. Approximately 600 licensed dialysis clinics operate in California. 2 multinational, for-profit corporations own or manage nearly 3/4 of them. The estimated annual revenue of these private companies is billions, $3 billion. Most dialysis is paid for by Medicare or Medi-Cal. The government programs pay a fixed rate established by regulations, and the rates are close to the costs. Private insurance companies cover dialysis with payment rates negotiated with the providers. This includes many of our government agencies for their employees and retirees. On those rates, they are multiple times higher than those paid by Medicare and Medi-Cal. This proposition would require 1 licensed physician on site during all treatment hours at the clinic's expense. Clinics may request an exemption if there is a valid shortage of doctors in the area. Then a nurse practitioner or physician assistant can meet the requirements for 1 year. This proposition requires the same level of care to all patients, regardless whether treatment is paid for by insurance private insurance or a government program. The proposition requires that clinics report information about patient infections to the State Department of Public Health with penalties for non-reporting or inaccurate reporting. And the proposition requires that clinics notify and obtain consent from the State Health Department for closing or reducing services. Now, some of those requirements in the proposition are partially covered under current California licensing requirements. To receive federal funding, clinics are required to have a board-certified medical doctor that is not present during all treatment hours, but about 25% of the time. Federal rules also require patients' doctors to visit the patient during dialysis at the clinic once a month. And they also require the reporting of infections, but they are required to report them to the National Healthcare Safety Network, not the state's health department. So again, the Prop 23 passes, it would require the medical practitioner, require reports to the state health department, prohibit the clinics from reducing and closing without state approval, and prohibit clinics from refusing to treat patients based on payment sources. So the fiscal effect? Well, the legislative analyst said that the new data reporting requirement would not significantly increase costs, but the cost to have a doctor on site during all treatment would increase each clinic's annual costs by several $100,000. It could increase the healthcare costs then to the state and local governments if clinics negotiate higher reimbursement rates, or some clinics close and patients have to receive treatment at a more expensive facility such as a hospital. These costs are estimated to be in the low tens of thousands of dollars annually. However, there's also the possibility clinics could choose to continue as they are and not make lower profits. So, yes means you'd like to implement the changes to the dialysis clinics, and no means you'd like them to remain the same. Supporters include the California Democratic Party and the California Labor Federation, and they say patients should have access to a physician on site when dialysis treatment is being provided, because dialysis is a dangerous procedure, and dialysis clinics in California have been cited for failure to maintain proper standards of care. Proper reporting and transparent of infection rates to the state health department, which would and then be published on their website, encourages clinics to improve their quality of care. And strong protection should be provided to all vulnerable patients when clinics close. This would also ensure that the dialysis companies do not use closures to pad their bottom line. So about $5 million in reported contributions were made, mostly from the SEIU healthcare workers. So what do opponents say? Well, due to costly requirements, Prop 23 would force community dialysis clinics to cut their services or close, threatening access to care and putting lives at risk. It would make our physician shortage worse, leading to more overcrowding in emergency rooms. It would take many physicians to dialysis clinics where they are not really needed. Dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and are high quality care. And the supporters include the California Medical Association, the American Nurses Association, the NAACP, and Latino Diabetes Association. So this proposition had the second highest contributions of all the contributions made this year. 93 million have been reported, of which about 80% comes from those two companies that make up nearly 75% of licensed for-profit dialysis clinics. So thank you very much, and I would like to introduce again Judy Bennett, who will talk about Prop 24.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay, Proposition 24 amends consumer privacy laws. This proposition was placed on the ballot by petition signatures. It's a 52-page complex statute. The question, shall an existing law from 2018, the California Consumer Privacy Act, be amended to increase penalties to create a new enforcement arm that would cost about $10 million annually. Currently, on June 28th of 2018, Governor Jerry Brown signed into law the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, or CCPA, which requires companies that store personal information to disclose to consumers what types of information are collected and how the information is used. Under California law, your privacy rights follow you wherever you go. But with Prop 24, the minute you travel out of California with a phone, a wearable device, or a computer, big tech companies are allowed to capture the health, financial, and other confidential information you stored on your device. If it passes, Prop 24 would limit the sharing of personal data, require correcting inaccurate data, and limit the use of sensitive personal data. Proposition 24 would change existing consumer data privacy laws, provide new consumer privacy laws, change existing penalties and limits to the penalty revenues, and create a new state agency to oversee and enforce consumer data privacy laws. Your ballot reads Amends Consumer Privacy Laws Initiative Statute. The fiscal effect is that Proposition 24 would impact state costs and state and local tax revenues. The actual size of these effects is uncertain and would depend on how consumers, businesses, and government respond to the proposition. The proposition would create a new agency from the state's general fund with a cost of $10 million annually. Depending on how the agency carries out its responsibilities, it is possible the actual workload costs could be higher. Potential impacts on tax revenues are possible. It could reduce tax revenues, or it could increase tax revenues if the statute could reduce the severity or number of data breaches. If businesses and consumers can make more money, they will pay more taxes. Again, a yes vote means existing consumer data privacy laws and rights would be expanded. It would create a new state agency, the California Private Protection Agency, which would share responsibility with the state's Department of Justice for overseeing and enforcing state consumer privacy laws. A no vote means current data privacy laws would not change. Businesses would continue to be required to follow existing consumer data privacy laws. The state's Department of Justice would continue to oversee and enforce these laws. Supporters of Proposition 24 say, the world's biggest corporations are collecting personal data about us, and our current laws are not strong enough to protect us. Our personal information and that of our children is being abused, and the information corporations are collecting about us is not kept safe from data breaches. Supporters include James Steyer, CEO, Common Sense Media, California NAACP, and Celine McTaggart, Director for Consumers Privacy. Opponents of Prop 24 say this proposition was written behind closed doors with input from giant corporations that collect personal data about us, and the proposition sponsor rejected almost all suggestions from 11 privacy and consumer rights groups. The real winners of Prop 14 are the biggest social media platforms. Prop 25 asks you to approve an internet pay-for-privacy scheme. If you pay, you can have privacy. Prop 24 is a step back for consumer privacy. It creates an opt-out system that puts the burden of privacy on the consumer instead of an opt-in system that places the burden on the business. California's new privacy laws just took effect. We haven't had enough time to gauge if they are effective. Opponents include the President of California for Privacy Now, the Consumer Federation of California, and Dolores Huerta, Labor and Civil Rights Leader. And now Maggie Augustine will explain Proposition 25.
Thank you, Judy. Proposition 25 is a referendum on a law that replaced the money bail system with a system based on determination of public safety and flight risk, put on the ballot by petition signatories. There are two questions. Will the public approve a 2018 law, Senate Bill 10, Will the public limit any detention for misdemeanors? In terms of release from jail before trial, there are three ways. Own recognizance release is pretrial release based on a written promise to appear in court and done without supervision. A supervised own recognizance release is OR with imposed specified conditions of release, such as frequent check-ins or electronic monitoring. A fee is due on the monitoring device. Bail is a temporary release of an accused person awaiting trial on the condition that a sum of money be lodged to guarantee their appearance in court. Bail would be replaced by an assessment service divisions, an entity unto itself which would determine the risk of public safety in flight. It would utilize assessment tools which were developed based on research that people with certain traits most likely would commit another crime or fail to show. Points are assigned to person's traits, and total number of points determines a person risk level. The risk level is used to decide if a person is released and under what conditions. If it passes, it eliminates release on bail. It creates the pretrial assessment services. It will utilize validated risk assessment tools. Low risk would mean immediate release except for domestic violence or failure to show for 2 times or more. Medium risk could be release, detention, or a fine. High risk is detention. There would be automatic release for misdemeanors except for domestic violence and failure to show 2 times in the past year. A yes vote means no one would pay bail but would be released on a system based on public safety and flight risk. No one would be charged fees as condition of release. A no vote means the system would remain as is, with some people paying bail to be released from jail before trial. Fees would be charged as a condition of release. The fiscal effect would impact both state and local costs, but how much is uncertain and would depend on how it would be interpreted and implemented. Increased costs could be in the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars annually. However, costs could be reduced if fewer people are held in jail or held for a shorter time period. The bodies that support this proposition are government officials, unions, such as the California Teacher Association, and organizations such as League of Women Voters California, the California Medical Association, and the Western Center on Law and Poverty. Supporters say the system is safe and non-discriminatory. The aggregate contributions are between 6 and 7 million. In terms of opposition, the entities are the Californians for Safe for Communities, sponsored by the American Bail Coalition, which consists of 10 committees that oppose the proposition. The NAACP, United Latinos Vote. The aggregate opposed contributions are 7 to 8 million. The opponents say the assessment tool is discriminatory against the poor, minorities, and people who live in certain neighborhoods. Now I would like to return you to Nancy K. for closure.
Thank you, Maggie. The League of Women Voters would like you to consider how to evaluate a ballot propositions. On your screen are some suggestions on how to look at a proposition. You look at the wording, you look to see if it's straightforward or complex. Double check the constitutional amendments. Their Constitution is the basis of our government. And consider who supports and opposes. Is there a special interest group? Read the names of the groups who support and oppose. Try to follow the money. Is it a mandate that's not funded? You need to be wary of distortion tactics and commercials. Beware of half-truths. And again, we'd like to reiterate the official voter information guide prepared by the Secretary of State is an excellent source of information. Other sources are the League of Women Voters, and they can be found on the California League's website. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, we want to encourage everyone to remember to vote on November 3rd. Be an informed voter. Please help make democracy work. Thank you.